Hello everyone and welcome to Project Cars Discussion episode 6, where I'm going to be talking about Project Cars 2. Yes, Project Cars 2. Do you think that's a bit early for me to be saying that? Well, a lot of people seem to agree with you. Yes, Project Cars 2 has already been announced as the successor to the original Project Cars. Now, this was announced in a blog post on the Project Cars site. You're seeing it on the screen now. You know, the start of the post is just about how the original game was successful and they're going to be doing Project Cars 2. And the more interesting stuff is sort of near the end, where it talks about what Project Cars 2 is going to be and the kinds of things that are in it. I'm going to just have a quick go across these sorts of things, and then I'm going to get into a bit more of a discussion about, how early this is for us to be seeing this. So, Project Cars 2, it's basically saying, largest track roster ever, 50 unique locations, 200 courses. The major difference is loose surface racing, so basically rallying on dirt, gravel, mud and snow. Dynamic weather, dynamic time of day, the stuff that we've got now. So, different variety of motorsports as well. 8 different disciplines, including hill climbs and rallycross as well. Rallycross should be a lot of fun. Good to see that included in the game. 200 plus cars, the original Project Cars, one of the problems with it that a lot of people seem to think that there wasn't enough cars. So 200 plus cars, 40 different vehicle classes. There's a co-op career, plays the teammate of a driver or his spotter or co-pilot for rallying, things like that. Different strategies you can involve yourself in, things like that. That should be a lot more interesting than just doing the career on your own. Esports racing, seamlessly connected, it's all the same kind of stuff that we've kind of got now in terms of online track days and things like that. But it does sound like there is a lot more in Project Cars 2, but I think the game Project Cars needs to fire the PR guy or their marketing guy or whoever the hell does this, or whoever basically wrote this article, because it doesn't basically tell you. This article, to me, gave the impression that the game was already pretty much half done and you were going to be seeing it very soon, which is actually not the case. For those of you who don't know, Project Cars was crowdfunded. So, I think it was maybe 3 years in the making or 4 years, something like that, where initially they crowdfunded it from people who wanted to see a game like this, and throughout the whole process, those guys were involved in saying what we want from a racing game on consoles especially, and that's what they're starting now with Project Cars 2. So it's not that the game is there ready to go and you're going to be seeing it straight away. It's that they're starting that crowdfunding process for Project Cars 2 now. So, basically all of the stuff that I've just read, the different motorsports, the largest track roster, co-op career, stuff like that, that is their vision for Project Cars 2. It's not here yet. It's not there. It's not ready to be released. That's their vision. That's what they want. If they get enough support through the crowdfunding, and as time goes on, they'll develop these sort of things into the game. This is what they want Project Cars 2 to be. Now, is it still too early for it? I would say yes. I mean, the game has only been out, what, a month, 2 months at the most? It hasn't been out very long, and a lot of the hate that has come from this blog post and announcing Project Cars 2 has come from the fact that the original game still seems unfinished, or certainly unpolished. There's a few bugs, it feels a bit empty, if you like, it still feels like there's stuff that needs to be added or needs to be fixed before they even start thinking about Project Cars 2, and that's what got a lot of people really annoyed. And for me, that's what made me annoyed as well, because this seems to be a trend that I've seen with games recently. Not just Project Cars, but most games seem to just be released unfinished or unpolished, things with problems with them. You go back to the really old days before we had the internet on games, and publishers and developers had to release a game that was going to work. They couldn't release a game with bugs because there was no way to then fix it. The old GTA games, for example, or going back even further with Sega games and things like that. they couldn't release a game that had problems. They had to make sure it was absolutely perfect before they sold it, because they weren't able to rely on patches or DLC to fix issues. And it seems like that is becoming a much more standard practice, to release a game that really isn't fully finished and then just rely on patches and fixes to be just given over the internet, and people can, and that basically fixes the game that should have been fixed in the first place. And you see it all the time, and it's really grated on me for a while, and it seems to be, you know, happening again with this. Now, Project Cars did have a few issues. Some of it was fixed in the most recent update, some of it still hasn't been. There's still bugs, there's still things that need to be worked on for the game. Now, Project Cars 2, you know, they've already got the physics there for the game. You know, they've developed that over the last 3 or 4 years with the main game. They don't need to innovate or do anything spectacular with that, really. So that basis is still there, so it should be somewhat easier to make Project Cars 2 than it was the original, because they've got the original to work from. But announcing it so early and giving us this sort of vision of what they want Project Cars 2 to be kind of gives the impression that, in addition to the fact that, you know, the original had these bugs and seemed to be released even a little bit too early, really, it seems to give the impression that Project Cars, the original game, was more like Project Cars Lite or Project Cars Beta. You know, it didn't, the fact that they've done this so early, it feels like we've been playing a beta, or the initial part of the game that it wasn't, you know, they for whatever reason they couldn't include the stuff that they want to do in Project Cars 2, you know, time constraints or, you know, funding or whatever. So it feels, that's what it feels like, and I can understand why people are, you know, slightly annoyed at the fact that they've already started releasing Project Cars, they've already started announcing Project Cars 2, and they started crowdfunding for it. Now, I do think their marketing department has something to answer for that, because they didn't make it clear that it's going to be a while before we see this game. You know, this is the vision for the game, and they're going to have to crowdfund it first and then test it and develop it initially as well. You know, the blog post makes it seem like it's just there ready to go again, and they're going to be releasing it soon. So they do have to take some blame for that, but they kind of they've shit in their own nest, really, with doing that. You know, announcing it so early after the original game is very, very new and still has problems and still needs fixes and still feels like there are updates and things that we need to see. It's just a shame to see, and it's something that I've, you know, as I mentioned, you see with other games as well being released too early, and it's just not good for anybody, really. So I am looking forward to Project Cars 2 whenever it comes out. You know, it does seem like they are trying to create the best racing game that they can, you know, that has all forms of motorsport, that has all different, you know, all of the tracks that you could ever want, the features that you could ever need for a racing game. It does seem like they want to get to that point where they have created a complete racing game experience where you can do any kind of racing that you want. And it does seem like that they have been a bit limited with the original Project Cars game, and they've just had to release it how it is now. But releasing, you know, announcing this so early and announcing it in the way that they did Project Cars 2, it's just been a terrible way to do it, in my opinion. So yeah, let me know what you guys think down below. Let me know what you guys think about the idea that Project Cars 2 has already been announced when we haven't even really got to grips with the original game. I'd really like to hear your thoughts. You know, it's difficult because they don't tell you really what they mean. You know, as I said, they've released a blog post that doesn't really give you the full picture. So I can imagine a lot of people out there are annoyed, thinking something's the case when it really isn't. But yeah, let me know all of your thoughts down below. For me, this is a trend that I'm seeing with games these days, you know, releasing too early and then going straight to a sequel without, you know, fixing the original game. There's not enough longevity in games these days. So yeah, let me know your thoughts down below. I'd really appreciate hearing it. Leave a like if you enjoyed all that good stuff. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.